Afternoon, America. How are you? This is Carlos Saldivia and Rob Noor and Todd Bartley and our show Pushback on the Patriots, on the Pennsylvania Patriots radio. And welcome to day 174 of the 15 days to flatten the curve. I um, I wanted to talk this morning about, or this afternoon about why we need to have more confidence in the merits of our own values, and why we need more hope, and why we shouldn't fall into temptation, and why we need to have more strength and more courage and more mastery in our devotions, and more honor. And and the reason why is because, as regular citizens to this, in this nation, in this great country, in this great republic, in this great gift that we have been given to live in this country at this time, is all those aforementioned things. Is That's how we fight back. We fight back with that type of, deep and abiding asceticism that maintains a very strict code. And it's a huge and abundant world out there, and there's enough room for all of us. So don't let the mob shame you. Worry more about living up to who you say you are. Worry more about being a good and truthful friend as opposed to expecting that from others. If you focus on the things that I just mentioned, everything will be fine. That's the core idea of everyone tending their own garden and pulling their own weeds, and not worrying about their neighbor, but worrying about themselves first. We need a change in the lingering problems on issues of dignity, and on issues of justice. And I really believe, in deep down in my heart as a young conservative, that the reason why someone like a Bernie Sanders had a word in edgewise is because of all the bankruptcies due to medical reasons, to no fault of the people who are sick. So we need discussions on things like healthcare, and especially for those that are aged. We need deeper discussions beyond liberty, and beyond freedom, and beyond open markets, on school choice for education, and on safe neighborhoods, and law and order, and good jobs, and broad economic opportunities in general for all people. We need discussions on insurance and tax and immigration reform, and realizable and predictable stability in the judicial system. That's huge, because justice can't be the same. Has to be the same for everyone. It can't be different depending on your class, or or how much money you have. We need to sermonize less. The reason why conservatives and many Republicans are furious with the GOP is that they never send a signal that they care about our dignity, nor respect the effort that it takes to raise children and keep the promise of America, and have a decent life in today's culture. These elites don't understand how much work that takes. So, do you want to participate in the land of promise? Then you're going to have to stand up and be counted by defending justice and the rule of law, and abiding to the truth. And that's the difference between us and them. So, good afternoon, Todd Bartley. How are you?
So far, so good for a Labor Day Saturday.
Yeah, it's the first of basically a 4-day weekend. And so I guess the question that I have for you today is, did Nancy Pelosi's blowout salon visit just end the lockdowns?
It may well have, but all you have to do is, is admit and take responsibility when you schedule and book your appointment to go to the salon or to the barber, that you're admitting to a setup. As long as you do that, I think everything is good. So if Rob wanted to go get his beard trimmed, or if you want to go get your beard trimmed, Carlos, or if I want to go get a haircut, as long as we will own up to the fact that we agreed to be set up, wink, wink, nod, nod, it should be all good.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a governor marching against his own order in a protest in excess of a maximum capacity of 250 people. Rob?
Yeah, that's what, don't get me wrong. Nancy Pelosi is as odorous as it comes as far as politicians. For my money, what our governor Tom Wolf did was as bad as it gets in the country. Because not only did he violate his own orders, but he called us cowards if we were worried and threatened funding and taking away people's license to operate business if they didn't abide by his orders. And then 2 weeks after he made that statement, admitted to breaking his own orders because, I don't know, he didn't really give an explanation. He's just like, yeah, you're right. I violated the orders. At least Nancy Pelosi deigned to come up with a clever story about a hair salon owner being involved in some conspiracy to force her to violate her own orders. Tom Wolf couldn't even be bothered to come up with that. He just expected that no one in the press would ask him and was shocked that we have at least one good person in the press named Todd Bartley that asked him about it.
Well, the other thing is that I believe what Nancy Pelosi did is worse. I mean, on two counts. The first count is she was a lot more vocal about social distancing and wearing masks than the governor was. Okay, anybody that she could shame into wearing a mask or criticize about not wearing a mask, she did. But moreover, and more importantly, was she not more mortally susceptible to getting COVID at 80 years old than most people?
Well, I mean, in the same week, you had Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who's been in and out of the hospital, pictures of her officiating a wedding without a mask with a bunch of people. And that's, look, let me be quite clear. I think that as much as I despise Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Nancy Pelosi, I hope they live long lives. I hope that they have great times with their family. I would like them out of political power as soon as possible, but I don't wish any illness or death upon them. And if we are actually being serious, the COVID, the numbers don't lie. More people have died over the age of 75 than under the age of 75 in this country. And those are
close.
Right. Those are the groups of people that we actually need to make sure that we're taking precautions with. Nancy Pelosi yells at the healthy age population and says that they need to be locked down, despite the fact that, for example, with younger people in schools, we could see that the regular flu is more deadly. And in addition to that, she happens to be in that, population that makes her the most vulnerable. So, yeah, I mean, you're right. It's specifically egregious. The other thing that arguably makes what Pelosi did more egregious is, theoretically, you could say Tom Wolf was marching for a cause that people could believe in. I don't see how you could make that claim that somehow there's some moral efficacy to going and getting your hair blown out.
So listen, okay, guys, this is a situation where I've told you several times before that my hair needs to be perfect because I am the Speaker of the House and I am on TV all the time. And I took my mask off just for a moment, just to get my hair washed, not to get hair dried, to get it washed. I'm also the same member of Congress that said unemployment will stimulate the economy, which is why I'm holding up $3 trillion to help regular Americans so I can put it to small businesses that are closed because of mask wearing and social distancing. So I take great exception to you guys characterizing this. It's anything other than what I'm supposed to be doing.
You need to have.
So did you see Jesse Kelly's tweet about Pelosi knowing that that if you give the media no place to go, if you refuse to apologize, they'll just go on and move to the next news cycle?
I didn't see that, but that's absolutely true. I mean, it's not just the media. This is, don't get me wrong, I have friends that are on the left that are reasonable people that, are critical thinkers, but a lot of what you see on the left, something that I noticed this week, I had someone tell me specifically, Trump definitely said that Nazis were good people. And so just for them, for 20 minutes, I read through the entirety of all 3 of Trump's speeches after Charlottesville, where not only does he not say they're good people, he specifically condemns them by name in 2 of the speeches, outright through bigotry and racial violence in all 3 of the speeches. And the person just moved on to, yeah, but what about him saying we should drink bleach? Another lie. That's exactly what they're trained to do. They can't handle facts. They just repeat innuendo and mischaracterization. And when you point it out, they just say, okay, on to the next thing.
Yeah, I want to bring that up a little later in terms of how Biden is fighting the president this campaign. But do you see the tweet that I have up on Jesse Kelly?
Yeah.
Pelosi doesn't think we're stupid. She knows this looks awful, but she also knows as Republicans should learn that you give the media no place to go. If you refuse to apologize, just go on the attack. They'll get super mad, but they'll quickly give up and move on. For the radio audience, that's Jesse Kelly's tweet.
And we have moved on significantly from that news cycle. And Jesse Kelly was right.
Well, he's wrong about one
Jesse
point.
Kelly,
the media's not mad. The media is Nancy Pelosi.
No. Yeah. But his major point was, how it affects Republicans.
Yeah.
But to lead in to the national debate between what's happening in our country in general with respect to Biden and the president, Rob, if you wanted to embitter a bunch of non-political Americans who don't vote into really despising hypocrisy from certain politicians, it's now working, correct?
Yeah. And look, I'll be quite clear that the majority of people I know here in rural Pennsylvania, I'm in Clarion County, most of them aren't heavily involved in politics. Most of them maybe voted once in their life at all. There were a lot that voted for the first time in 2016 because they thought Trump was the first person that spoke to them. But even the ones that aren't involved in politics, here's the truth. When it comes to COVID and things like that, most Americans are willing to make sacrifices if they think it's for the greater good. So they were willing, right, when it was flatten the curve, 2 weeks to flatten the curve, they were willing to make sacrifices. They were willing to do that. But what they're not willing to do is have it thumbed in their face, where they can see the very people that are the most morally righteous that are calling them out saying, oh, you're a terrible person if you don't follow all of these orders to the T. If you want to go visit your grandma in the nursing home, you're a terrible person. If you want to go to your non-essential place of work and you're worried about feeding your kids, you're terrible. You're terrible if you want to go to church. And then they watch over and over. By the way, at my count, it's over 15 Democrats I've now seen in positions of leadership that have got caught with their hand in the cookie jar violating the orders. You have Whitmer, Murphy, Cuomo, Pelosi herself. There's
multiple times, right?
Right. And so they're not even trying anymore. And then when you catch Pelosi, even just from a moral standpoint, clearly the moral thing for her to do was to be contrite and say, I'm sorry, you're right, I'll try better. Not that that's good enough for me, but at least that morally would have been contrition. But strategically, how could you think it's a good idea? Like, believe it or not, I don't know if you can tell, those of you that can see me, I'm not someone who goes to get my hair done very often, but there are a lot of people in this country that do, and it is true that it's predominantly women, and it's not just to look good. There's also health reasons that it's important to go get your hair properly taken care of if you have longer hair and things like that. What are they thinking right now when they see, so wait a minute, I have to stay home, but Nancy Pelosi and Lori Lightfoot, the governor of Chicago, they could go out to the salons. Oh, and then when they get caught, they blame the salon. It's the salon's fault. They set me up. So if you're a small business owner, this is what's in store for you. Vote Democrat. This is what's in store for you. You are going to be arbitrarily targeted. They are absolutely interested in destroying the economy and the middle class. They don't appreciate you as a small business owner. Every policy they've taken since COVID has radically benefited huge corporations like Amazon. For example, I'm sure that the haircut joints that are big corporations, like, I can't think of an example, but you know what I'm talking. There are those places that you see in like every town. They're probably doing fine under COVID. You know who's not doing fine? Supercuts, yeah. You know who's not doing fine? My cousin that owns a hair salon. You know, all these people that own little hair salons. So just remember, they will attack you. And then if they make a mistake and violate their own orders, they'll attack you further.
Well, it reminds me of Jesse Kelly's other tweet this week that I thought was significant, and that is that regardless of what you think the involvement that the Democrats have with this Marxist movement, they're not going to stop until they're made to stop. And if you think that they'll get tired of this, you still don't understand what you're facing. This is a full-out Marxist revolution, and COVID and lockdowns and this is nothing to them, and they're not going to stop, of course, unless you make them stop. So my question to you is, one of the most significant things that I've seen in this whole entire cycle of violence and stuff is what happened in Rochester last night, where now they're moving into neighborhoods and attacking homes in neighborhoods. And there was one video that I saw where they were coming in and they literally were on the roof of somebody's house and on the second floor, trying to get into people's houses, and there was hundreds of them on the street. This is what it looks like. But my question to you is, do you think that we will ever have a better opportunity to finish them? Democrats and the progressives and their blind partisans and Black Lives Matter and Antifa and the mainstream media politically, than the opportunity that we have now? I mean, this is the very best time, in my opinion, to be able to politically pulverize their poisonous ideas into the ground while we still have the chance, if we fight back, if we push back, no?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. So the sad reality is we've already waited way too long. If you follow Robert Epstein, who's a professor, he testified in front of Congress that Google alone has the ability to sway 16 to 22 million votes in the 2020 election alone. Now, if we lose this,
for the favor of saying that, he put himself in jeopardy, and there is a lot of evidence that says that they killed his wife for it.
He's questioned that. So I don't know if that's, obviously I can't speak to the truth of that, of the specific nature, but he feels that he's been targeted, and perhaps his wife was targeted for that. But it's no doubt that they have this much power, and if they win, and make no mistake about it, a Biden presidency is the presidency of YouTube, Google, Facebook, Twitter. It's the presidency of the oligarchs that run Amazon. It's the presidency of the Washington Post, the elites. This is the first revolution that is paid for by the elite against the working class. That's what Black Lives Matter is. That's what Antifa is. That's why they're supported by every institution. Remember, Black Lives Matter's claim is there's institutional racism, and all of these institutions despise this. Name me one institution that is critically outspoken of Black Lives Matter. Is it Hollywood? Is it the media? Silicon Valley? Corporations? Academia? No. All of them are almost universally marching in concert with Black Lives Matter and Antifa as they burn down our cities. So if we don't stop them now, if they are further entrenched in power, that means they'll further be able to control the narrative. And we could probably talk about this later. I know we kind of one of the issues we brought up, but I myself had a video taken off YouTube live 2 days ago for just pointing out the hypocrisy and the lies of the CDC and Dr. Fauci. For bringing this up, we're on YouTube right now. There's a chance that we'll be kicked off YouTube as we're going for rebringing
that up. We're going to talk about it, by the way, YouTube. Just the reason we're going to talk about it at the end of the show. So we'll be able to say it and not give you any recourse to be able to take us off the air until the end of the show. So keep listening, okay?
Yeah. But I mean, just real quick to finish. Yeah, I mean, it's certainly now is the crucial time. Listen, the Democrats are. This is as simple as I could put it. The Democrats are telling you, with a wink and a nod, vote for us or we'll burn down your country. We'll burn it down with riots. We'll burn it down with racial division. We'll burn it down with arbitrary lockdown orders. We'll burn it down by intentionally collapsing the economy. We'll burn it down with open borders. We'll burn it down through mail-in voting that we know is going to be filled fraudulently. Just this week, the Washington Post put out their war game scenario where John Podesta played the role of Joe Biden. As Hillary Clinton has suggested, he refused to concede. In the Washington Post article, they said the only scenario that will have a peaceful transition of power is if Joe Biden wins a clear-cut victory. Now, They want you to believe that it's Trump supporters that are the problem. Ask yourself this. Why do we all know, including the Washington Post, that the violence will occur if Trump wins? If Biden wins, Trump supporters will most likely be like, that's shucks, we'll try again in 4 years. But if Trump wins, there'll be violence. Yet, somehow, they say that proves that Trump supporters are violent. Why would Trump supporters get violent if Trump wins? So what they're telling you is vote for them or there'll be violence. And I actually know people that this is working with. I actually know business owners that are like, whatever, I'm desperate. I need to get back to work. I'm tired of this violence. I'm tired of the lockdown. So if voting Democrat, even though they're the ones causing it, if voting them means they'll lift these restrictions, maybe I'll do it. And I'm here to tell you, if they get away with it this time, it will never end in our lifetime. Every 4 or 2 years when there's an election, they will burn down the country more. And they'll say, you have to vote for us.
Yeah. And that's why I said the things that I said at the beginning, in the opening, is that I couldn't be any more serious about these things because I can see the road to where we were, let's say, even 25 years ago. That world doesn't exist anymore at all. And I don't understand how anything can function now with cancel culture and intersectionality. I don't see how Hollywood could operate. I don't see how politics can operate. I don't see how business can operate if someone like Little League International and Steve Keener bends the knee to someone like Black Lives Matter. It's over. Now, someone like Steve Keener, I don't think understands that it's over. He's getting a pass because there's no World Series and no Little League this year, and possibly no Little League next year because they have to virtue signal all the way to the complete end to buy some time. But at some point, they're going to pay the piper. And I'm just talking in women's sport. It's a major institution. There's 7,000 leagues right now. If we come back with 5,000 leagues, it will be a miracle. Not to mention that that subscriptions will be down and kids won't be playing, and not to mention what happens in sports with the World Series and the Stanley Cup and NFL football this year. And I know that Todd can talk about what's happening with the Big Ten and college football. I don't think that the damage is completely done with respect to sports and the fact that we will never be able to see sports in the way that we used to because all of these things have now infiltrated the sports culture. Is that correct, Todd?
Yeah, no question. And having been on the receiving end of a peaceful protest that went bad in my driveway that turned into a firebombing at the hands of the elites in this town when they have their power threatened in any form, manner, or fashion, you see how they act out, right?
Yeah, it's what happens when you don't shut up.
So, and I'm not going to shut up. So there's only one way to get me to shut up. You guys know what that is. It is what it is.
But isn't it true, Todd, that 93% of the people that are angry at you were peaceful? So who cares if your car was firebombed, correct?
That was my
That's
favorite.
True. They did identify as peaceful protesters before the incident, and they continue to do that after the incident because remember, gentlemen, there is no there in regard to Myrtle Beach.
Right.
My favorite meme of the 93%, Rob, is Hansen. His last name is Hansen. He's on Twitter, and he says 93% of all the planes on 9/11 landed.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so they put out a report. Was it Princeton? I have it saved on my Twitter. And the report said something to this effect. It said, well, 93%, it proves 93% of the Black Lives Matter protests have been peaceful. And what they've done is they looked at over 2,700 something distinct location that had protests, and they found out that only 220 different locations had violence. That's 4 cities per state. And that's just, when they talk about violence, that just means that location had violence. So, for example, we've had violence, 90 nights in a row in Portland? Mm-hmm. That only counts as 1, though, right? Because that's one location with violence. So you tell me, if that's something that we shouldn't get worried about, okay, well, according to the Washington Post, last year, police shot and killed 14 unarmed black men. Now, there were probably, we have 800,000 law enforcement officers in this country. Yeah. I think that's
60,000 encounters.
How many?
1 in 60,000 is results in a shooting.
Oh, okay.
I don't know what the breakdown. I don't know what the breakdown of that is with respect to deaths. So it's even more remote.
You're right. So let's just take the 1 in 60,000. That's fractions of a percent. Why are we burning down the country over that? Why is that such an? And
because it's not about that.
Right. They're clearly disingenuous, right? Like, and all you have to know is this: like, take Pennsylvania. How many big cities do we have? 2, arguably 3. Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Erie. Okay. Well, if each state has 4 locations, right? Well, well, of course, Williamsport. You can't leave that out. But if every state has 4 locations that have suffered violence as a result of this, that's a huge deal. And they're making it out to be like, remember, the Tea Party was demonized as this radical, horrible group. How many violent incidents were there with them? How many riots were there with the Tea Party? Yet the entire media went off on that. Charlottesville, don't get me wrong, the people that ran Charlottesville, heinous people, despise them. That was 1. And that set the media on fire for years. 1 incident. Now we're admitting to 220 distinct locations as a result of, this is their own research of Black Lives Matter. And they're like, oh, mostly peaceful. Well, I could say the same of any extreme group. The majority of extreme groups, even this is horrible to say, but the majority of people that identify as Al-Qaeda probably have never committed violence. The reason we focus on them is because the violence that is being committed by them is so extreme that it has a huge detrimental effect on any country or any situation where it happens. Right.
Well, my contention, and I'm sorry for being so cynical, but Todd, do you really actually believe that they looked at over 2,500 incidents to come down and realize that only 7% are things that we have to worry about? I don't believe any of their numbers at all. I'm sorry, I don't believe anybody at all. Nobody. I don't believe anybody in anything that comes out of media, including us. Don't believe us. You should not be believing us. You should be doing the homework by yourself. You should be finding out for yourself what all of this means. And I just don't believe that you've done that work. And the fact that it's turned into a meme is part and parcel as to why it's turned into a meme. No one really believes you. And it's a stupid thing to talk about. When people are getting destroyed, and these things are are designed simply to destroy the middle class America, and our livelihood and our ability to work. Because, the worst thing that you can do to America is to mess with their psyche. Correct, Dad?
I wanted to reclaim my time after your filibuster there for a moment. I wanted to also say that the straw poll that I took out of Kenosha, Wisconsin, with the 2 appearances this week between President Trump and Joe Biden's, it appeared that 93% of the voting population in Kenosha showed up for President Trump, and only 7% showed up for former Vice President Biden.
Some of them to heckle him.
Just an observation, just stuff. If photos tell any kind of a story.
Right. So
let me just say real quick,
Robert,
just to push back. I actually believe, I basically believe the 93% are peaceful. And here's why. Clarion had a peaceful Black Lives Matter protest. It was about 150 people. That's why there's the majority of small towns. Like, there's small towns all over this country that are like, yeah, Black Lives Matter. Let's go out and have 30 people on the street holding a candle. Yeah, the majority of those have been peaceful. Absolutely true. The problem is, those aren't the events that matter. The events that matter are places like Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, D.C., Chicago, Detroit, right? Those are the ones that matter. What are the percentage of those in big cities that have been peaceful? Because, if you get 30 people in a small town, like, for example, Clarion, predominantly white town, You had a bunch of people, though, that stood in solidarity with what they see as legitimate racial grievances. I disagree. I think that Black Lives Matter is a terrorist Marxist organization, but nonetheless, they have the right to go out and peacefully protest, and they did. That's the sort of things that's happening.
How many were there?
I think there were 200 around in Clarion. So you figure...
So they were under the outdoor limit of 250. That's at least a positive.
Well,
How many of them were from Clarion?
No, probably most of them. It was mostly college kids at the local university here. But I believe, like,
so
there
they're
was
really not from Clarion. They just go to school in Clarion.
School wasn't.
You hear what I'm saying?
But
right?
it doesn't. But even then, there was this Katanning up the street. They had a small protest, like 20 people, right? So when you're looking at the 2,700 locations that have had Black Lives Matter protests, sure, there's been thousands of small towns that had people come out, a dozen or so people come out and say, yeah, we're against police violence. That's not what we're talking about, right? And so that's how they're able to say, oh, well, the majority. Now, notice the way they did this wasn't by people, it was by locations. There were 2,700 locations that have had Black Lives Matter protests, and 93% of them didn't result in any violence. Well, yes, that's true. It turns out that these small towns, they weren't having violence. And I think I can speak for both you and Todd where I say, that's fine. Even if we disagree with your movement, if you want to go have a peaceful protest, that's fine. That's not what we're seeing in Rochester. That's not what we're seeing in Portland. That's not what we saw in the Chaz Zone. We have over 35 people that have been murdered.
Is it Chaz or Chop?
Whatever. Morons. That's what they are.
It depends on what day it is and if the National Guard is showing up or not.
It's actually should be aptly named Sleepless in Seattle, no?
Let's not forget, by the way, if I could just say real quick, the news cycle comes so fast. One of the things that we need to do a better job of is holding their feet to the fire. Let's not forget, there is audio. There is actual audio of the police in the CHOP zone or the Chaz zone that was set up by the radical Antifa Black Lives Matter people. They actually executed a 16-year-old black teenager and critically wounded a 14-year-old with them. You could hear about the 30 bullets from the audio that they put in. Then they walked up to the car and said, this N-word's still breathing, and put 3 more bullets in him. That's what Black Lives Matter did, right? You don't hear about that, though, do you? You don't hear about it at all. Instead, you'll hear about the next...
One of the worst things that I've ever read about, because I didn't see the video or hear it, but I read about it. It's one of the worst things, if not at the very top of the list of the worst things that I ever heard in my lifetime.
Do you think that kid's name will...
years old.
Do you think that kid's name will make his way onto Drew Brees' helmet?
No.
They don't care.
As far as I'm concerned. So just so you know, and I want to go back and bring in Todd with respect to the media coverage of these things. You don't understand. So I'm going to make it clear. The way that I'm fighting this is on September 1st, I left Facebook. And by January 1st, I'll be leaving Twitter. And I will be leaving Google and all their Google products I will be leaving. I will not be participating in this at all anymore, ever again. And for those who know me, you know, I'm serious, okay? But do you, given the number, Todd, of 2,700 different locations, do you believe the people who put this out were at all 2,700 locations to be able to verify and give us a study, A, in this short order, and B, did they actually do the work that's required to come up with these numbers? The answer for me is no. What say you?
I sincerely doubt it.
2,700 different locations.
I sincerely doubt it.
Robert just said Portland was one, right? I mean, they didn't do this, right? This is all a lie.
Well, no, there's one way to verify it. If they got the internal memo.
And a lie that YouTube and Google and Facebook and all these people are perpetrating.
The only way to verify that would be, because you said they didn't have boots on the ground, was there an internal document that said we're going to 2,700 different cities and here's who's on the payroll to go to 2,700 different cities? That's one way to verify it. It's almost like a George Leppley letter authored on May 31st, 2018. It's almost that kind of documentation. You know, when they say it doesn't exist, then it exists. When you're holding the memo or the letter,
yeah, it only depends.
It's that kind of a thing.
Yeah, it only depends what Todd knows and what he doesn't know, you know. And if you think that Todd doesn't know anything, you can lie to him. So, Robert, tell us exactly what precipitated the Kenosha riots, and let's talk about that for a little bit.
So, Kenosha, you had a man by the name of Jacob Blake, who was an African-American man. The original story was this, something to the effect of he was stopped and accosted by the police for no reason. They weren't called on him. He was complying with the police and then decided to leave the scene because he felt the police were being violent towards him or something. And as he attempted to get in his vehicle and leave, police shot him 7 times in the back. That's what led to, within 2 to 3 hours of that story circulating, you started to see riots in Kenosha. Now we know that the actual story was this, and this is graphic, so I'll try to use as little graphic language as possible, but it's important you know the full context. Jacob Blake had the police called on him because he had routinely assaulted and raped his ex-girlfriend, whom I believe he had children with, but I'm not sure if they were his kids or not. He entered her house early in the morning, demanded his stuff, whatever that means, and then she was laying in bed with an 8-year-old child, and he came in and used his hand to rape her while she lay in bed with her child. She called the police hysterical, bawling, saying that it caused her both physical pain and humiliation. She was also worried about the safety of her children. When the police showed up, although we don't have full body cam footage, what we know from their report is that they tried to subdue him and arrest him for this rape and the fact that there was endangerment. There were 2 kids in a van that he had stolen the keys for. I believe these were the kids of the woman who called the police. He was attempting to get into that van. The police tried to subdue him. At one point, he had one of the police officers in a headlock. The police used non-lethal force. They shot him with a taser. It was ineffective for whatever reason, whether he was just physically that imposing or perhaps he was intoxicated on substances, but the taser did not work. He was seen... I don't know. I've seen images of him brandishing a knife, but either way, the police claimed they knew he had a knife, and at this point, the knife was in the car. He approaches the car with the 2 kids in it and allegedly reaches for the knife, and he was shot 4 times by police. Now, I don't know what's expected of the car. I don't know. I don't know exactly if this is a good shoot or not, but clearly it's far more ambiguous than we were led to believe initially. What were the police supposed to do? Should you leave someone who allegedly raped a woman in bed with an 8-year-old boy enter this vehicle after he had a scuffle with police, overcame a taser, and now he's reaching for a knife with 2 kids within reach of him? Are they supposed to just leave that? They already used, everyone's like, they should have used less than lethal force. They did. It didn't stop him. It overcame him. So what was he supposed to do? Or so what were the police supposed to do? So as a result, there were riots that occurred 2 nights. On the 3rd night of the riots, the townsfolk were getting upset. And so a lot of local business owners asked people to come together and arm themselves to protect small businesses. And in the course of this, a man by the name of Kyle Rittenhouse, an 18-year-old who worked as a lifeguard in Kenosha, was asked by a personal friend of his to accept a firearm and to defend that business. He also was scrubbing graffiti all day, and he ended up offering publicly, while being interviewed, that he was willing to use his skills as a lifeguard to administer first aid to protesters or to business owners trying to protect their business. He was offering first aid to people, and now the official story is from his defense team that he left the used car dealership or the car dealership for a moment. He came back. The police asked him not to be there. He then saw a literal dumpster fire where protesters had lit a dumpster on fire in an attempt to commit arson. He put that fire out. That's what preceded the video we now see. So then he was being chased. We could see a man that was in his face earlier from video that was yelling, a white man, by the way, who's shouting, "Shoot me, N-word, shoot me," is now chasing Rittenhouse from where the video picks up where we can see. He's chasing Rittenhouse. We then hear a gunshot coming from the direction of the man chasing Rittenhouse. Rittenhouse turns to, as he's running away, trying to de-escalate the situation, he turns to face the gentleman who's chasing him, and that gentleman lunges for his gun, an AR-15. Rittenhouse shoots in self-defense. He then proceeds to pick up a phone and try to call someone to say, and he's going to stay there because he's waiting for law enforcement to show up. The mob begins to chase him. He runs from the mob. He slips and falls. One of the mob smashes him in the head with a skateboard as he's on the ground. He shoots that person in self-defense. The second person in the mob draws a gun on Rittenhouse. He shoots him in self-defense. That's it. That's the entirety of the incident. Facebook will now, if this was on Facebook, what it's not, we literally would have this video removed because you're not allowed to suggest that Kyle Rittenhouse acted in self-defense. They literally they are now, it's against their terms of service to say that this, not that it is, but that this could be a case of self-defense. Now, I'm open to seeing more evidence, but from all available evidence, this is as clear-cut as it gets. If an angry mob is chasing you while you're open carrying, it's clear that they are escalating to extreme violence. And you have, especially when you hear gunshots, you have the right to protect yourself. It's clear that the left wants the police to not be there for you to not be able to protect yourself. Your obligation is to get beaten by the mob. That's the party of Joe Biden. That's their argument. And so what we see now is, on this case, they're doing, in every single situation, they take alleged rapist, in the case of George Floyd, someone who allegedly pointed a gun at a pregnant woman's stomach. In the case of this Reinhold guy, they executed a Trump supporter who's now dead.
No, he didn't allegedly point a gun at someone's stomach.
Oh, he definitely did, right.
He definitely did, and he went to jail for it.
Right. So when it's the actual criminals, they treat them as, oh my goodness, these are heroes, or these are noble people, or let's look at things, which, by the way, I'm not always against the idea of saying just because you have a criminal past, does that mean that the current situation, you deserved it? For example, if you did something heinous 20 years ago, that doesn't mean that if someone shoots you now, it was legal for them to do so. But it's just amazing to me how when you actually see a case that looks like a clear-cut case of someone that was a law-abiding citizen defending themselves, they just assert and they use their censorship powers to say, no, that's a mass murder. And it's ridiculous if you don't condemn him. Whereas with all of these criminals that are engaged in all this stuff, they give the total benefit of the doubt to.
So, Todd, at the beginning of the end for all these people, the Googles and the YouTubes and the Facebooks, is exactly that, right? It's that censorship that's going to finish them, because something will come in and take its place that will be fresher and more palatable for people. But before you comment on that, let's back up to the original attack by Jacob Blake, and that from the specific point of view and context of, believe all women. So he penetrated her and then took his hand out and he smelt it and he said, it smells like you've been with other men. So the context was that he has been angry with her for a long, long time. Now he comes in and rapes her, says that, does that, and takes his kids and puts them in a car and tries to drive away in the car. By the way, the car is her van, and he tries to drive away in her van. Todd, how much of what's happened in the last 5 months do you think affected the ability of police officers to handle this case the way that they would have ordinarily done it in January, in August?
Well, I think he was known to law enforcement to begin with, Carlos. I think you've outlined a pattern of behavior that he was demonstrating, that they knew that he had a past. I'm sure they've been called with her. Especially with her. I'm sure they've been called multiple times to the residence to deal with these particular situations, right? That got to a point where they had to use, as Robert outlined so eloquently, non-lethal to begin with. It had no effect whatsoever, and they deemed it necessary because he was a danger not only to them, to the folks that are involved, to the children in the van, to the victim. He was a danger to society, and they deemed necessary that they needed to use that kind of force. And then you get a mob.
You think there's a difference between the type of force they used in August, even though they shot him 7 times. There was a precipitating force that they should have used before they shot him, that they would have used in January, that they didn't use in August. Don't you think that that's fair to say?
No question. And the Attorney General, Bill Barr, has come out and said he was armed.
Right.
I mean, when you've got the Attorney General of the United States coming out and weighing in on a case, that for right now is a local case, and he said the guy was armed, and he didn't go as far as to say they were justified yet, because at some point they're going to have to do an investigation at the federal level.
Right.
But those folks were in danger, no question.
And I would just like to say to anyone that's saying, well, the fact that he was shot in the back proves that this was unjustified. May karma never visit you. May you never be being attacked by someone that the police used non-lethal force, you were raped, then they're going after your children with a knife. May you never be in that situation where you say, well, it would be totally unreasonable for the police that he just overpowered and he overpowered their non-lethal attempts at force for them to stop him from grabbing this lethal weapon and lunging towards these children. That would be totally unreasonable. The police can't do that. It's now in this criminal rapist hands. It's in his hand. That's the role of law enforcement. There are millions of people in the country that believe that. They believe that what police were obligated to do, if they couldn't resist him with non-lethal force, they had to just get on their knees and pray and say, please don't slice these kids' throats that you just raped their mother in front of. Please don't do it. That's what they think the cops were obligated to do. You disgust me. You people that think this disgust me. Now, I'm not saying that I have definitive proof that this police version of events is what happened, but neither does anyone else in this country, with the exception of possibly some people in law enforcement. And I could see, and here's how I know that they're disingenuous, because there's so many instances that we were, by all of our elites in the media and the Democratic Party and in Black Lives Matter and other organizations, we were promised this event proves police brutality and their racism. You know, events like Michael Brown. And thank goodness that we were going to have, you know, Barack Obama's wingman, Eric Holder, his Justice Department did an investigation into Michael Brown. Oh, wait, we were lied to, it turns out. Eric Holder and Barack Obama's Justice Department proved that no, Michael Brown wasn't murdered. That actually, despite what the media told you and what the Democratic Party told you and what all of these Black Lives Matter people told you, it actually was a justified shoot because the forensic evidence along with witness testimony show Michael Brown lunged for the officer Derek Wilson's gun and Derek Wilson shot him in self-defense. Right. Now, let's look at just this.
That's the Obama DOJ, not the Trump.
That's right.
DOJ.
That's exactly right. Let's look at just this week. We saw last week, a week and a half ago, Minneapolis, you had looting and rioting. Why? Because the police shot an unarmed black man. Oops, except the footage showed that it wasn't a police shooting an unarmed black man. It was a black murder suspect committing suicide in front of camera. Yet, despite the fact that two of the women that were in the scene when he committed suicide, they were later seen looting. Allegedly because police shot this man. So that was another lie. We now see in D.C. that they're rioting the other day because police shot an unarmed black 18-year-old. Only now the body cam footages came out, and we saw that not only was he armed, he was charging at police and was brandishing the gun, was beginning to raise it when he was shot. So over and over, we see these incidences that they just say, oh, this is it. Cop shot a black man. It must be prove racism. It proves systemic racism. It justifies these riots. And then 95% of the time, it turns out that the case is way more complicated. And let me just say this real quickly. We already talked about this. There are 800,000 law enforcement officers in this country. Inevitably, every year you will have some heinous actions by some of those people. And they should, I think all of us of all skin colors agree, those people need to be held to account more often, and we need to have better mechanisms to make sure they're held accountable. But it's inevitable. If we're going to burn this country down every time a cop acts in a bad way, it'll be burned in perpetuity because you will never stop it. Police are necessary. They're inevitable. And when you have such a big country with so many people, inevitably there will be bad police actions. So what we need to do is come together as adults and understand that we shouldn't be using this as political pawns to justify burning down cities and justify, again, I'll say it as plainly as I can. I do think Black Lives Matter, and that's why I'm opposed to the terrorist Marxist organization Black Lives Matter, because their policies and their advocacy is directly harming Black Americans first and foremost, more than any other group.
Yeah, no, I part company with you. I think it's all a lie. Todd, do you have family that's police?
Let's just say this, so we're not putting anybody in harm's way. I have family that is on the job.
Okay. So
what relation they are, extended or not.
I'm not going there. In your discussions with respect to their work, and you know, I also have a son on the job, and I have many, many friends that are on the job. And so here's the question. Have you ever been in a conversation with police officers where they talk to you about the situations that they get into? And how often when you get into those situations, do you do you come across a recurring bias with police officers of them looking at a situation through the lens of the 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 the, the person that they're looking at having a criminal past? We talk about that. We the context of that is that they call them convicts. So whether we like it or not, there is a police bias, an obvious police bias of policemen looking at convicts, the police, and targeting them because they've dealt with them before. I'll give you an example. If you have a history of being caught by the police of molesting little boys and girls or raping them, and they see you in the company of a minor, what do you think is going to go through their head? So the bias with police officers, the most important bias that exists with police officers is your criminal past, not race. Correct? Floyd.
Yeah, the situation
Floyd was not a race situation. Floyd is that here we go again with this friggin' convict and me answering a call on this convict again. A drug dealing convict. And here it is that he is trying to pass a fake $20 bill to go buy more drugs while he in fact at the time is under the influence of methamphetamines and enough fentanyl to kill the average human being, which ended up killing him anyway, which now has led to the police officer who allegedly killed him by putting his knee on his neck, asking for a dropping of the charges because of the coroner's
medical
report.
examiner's report.
Right. So that's number one. That's one thing I'd like you to comment on is their bias. The other bias that I'm looking at the 30,000 foot level is with respect to Tara Reid and Biden, and with respect to Pelosi and the owner of the shop where she got her hair done, and with respect to Jacob Blake and his wife. Why is it always the woman's fault?
So let's go back to the beginning and the conversations about law enforcement and quote unquote implicit bias, I think is your question, right?
Yes.
So
we all have biases, right?
Let's put a hypothetical together, gentlemen, shall we? You're going to serve a high risk warrant on somebody, right?
Yeah.
In preparation of serving the high risk warrant or having an interaction with somebody, with law enforcement. Now, again, this is all kind of time to prepare. This is not in the moment, right? With time to prepare, you go through a dossier, not a Russian Steele dossier, but a real dossier. This person has a rap sheet. They've had felony gun charges. They've had any kind of drug issues. They've had PFAs. So they have a pattern of behavior that you can identify that they're prone to violent behavior. They're prone to issues with authority. Can we agree in the hypothetical that
Yes.
potentially is there? Okay. So if you're going to go serve a high-risk warrant, are you going to go there to play a game of tiddlywinks? If you're law enforcement?
Yeah.
Or are you going to be prepared to deal with somebody who's prone to violence? Which means you're going to defend yourself. Shields, non-lethal, and we're not going to get into all of the different array of, what they can use non-lethally, but you're also going to potentially bring lethal force if they present lethal force against you. That's in a we have time to prepare situation. Did I mention race once in that
Never.
scenario? Because in that kind of behavior, you don't care what color they are. You don't. It's not a factor. Carlos, is it a factor for you? Rob's factor for you?
No.
Or is it behavior dictating the terms of the engagement?
And especially if you're Latino and Black, and you're part of that equation. You know, more than half of the police officers of the 4 that were involved in the Floyd shooting or the Floyd incident were people of color.
Okay, so you go with implicit bias. The bias, for the most part, in my humble experience, and I'm not speaking for everybody, but in mine, is you're trying to protect you and the folks that are with you.
Right.
That's the first bias. Self-preservation.
Right. And
but that's not good enough for the mob, right? That's not good enough for the mob. We've heard them chant that.
Right.
That's not good enough.
We've all seen enough, dashboard footage, dash cam footage of police officers dying in trying, when they're approaching cars and all kinds of stuff. So,
I can't wait till Don Lemon shows up in my driveway. We give him the video of the car bombing and the thing on fire going, but it was peaceful. It was peaceful.
Don, by the way, Don Lemon, okay?
I apologize. Don Lemon. Apparently he is related to Jussie Smollett, the French actor. I apologize, Don Lemon. What was your other question on bias?
Why is it always the women's fault?
Well, no, let's take it a step further. It's always the victim's fault. Ask Nancy Pelosi, she'll tell you. She was set up.
Nancy Pelosi blamed it on the woman salon owner.
Because she was the victim of a setup.
Yeah.
That was her argument. She was the victim.
So the fact that she's a woman, that the salon owner is a woman is coincidental.
Yeah, oh, yeah, absolutely, yeah. Right. If it was,
Let's make no mistake about it.
Yeah.
Tara Reid single-handedly will be an American hero because she single-handedly killed the idea of Me Too. Single-handedly destroyed Me Too. Forever. Because you wanted to get one man. All of this is about trying to get one man. All of this, the reason why they don't want to do anything about COVID and they want to keep the country locked down and they refuse to stop the rioting is because they hate Trump more than they love this country.
Can I give you a signal about that?
Yeah.
I just wrote a story about this earlier in the week. The Department of Health in the state of Pennsylvania, I don't know if either one of you guys saw this, they have put out a request for application for hub and spoke testing in the 6 regions that have been identified that we've talked about in the state all the time, right? Southeast, Northeast, that whole deal.
Right.
Until June of 2022 and to the tune of $60 million. They want to test for COVID for the next 2 years. And potentially 6 years from today. What's going on in the next 2 to 6 years in this state after Governor Wolf leaves office? What's going to happen?
An election.
An election for governor.
Robert, how could it possibly be that Joe Biden went to Kenosha and spoke to Blake's family and didn't speak to any business leaders when he went there? How could it possibly be?
Well, he had to talk to Jacob Blake Sr., known Louis Farrakhan, black supremacist, anti-Semite follower. That's who he had to talk to. Let's not mince hairs here. Joe Biden went and talked to a known black supremacist anti-Semite who posts things calling Jewish people pink-toed Jews, who alleged that the Jewish community in Pittsburgh knew that there was a shooting coming at the Pittsburgh synagogue, and so that they got all the important Jews out in time, and they used it just so they could play victimhood again. That's who Joe Biden met with. That's the gentleman Joe Biden met with. Now, he couldn't be bothered to meet with law enforcement, or he couldn't be bothered to meet with business leaders that lost their businesses and things like that. Instead, he wanted to meet with a black supremacist anti-Semite. And the reason is quite clear, because it has to do with what we were talking about, what Todd said about blaming the victim. We truly have entered a world of George Orwell of 1984. War is peace. The guilty are the just are the guilty. And so Joe Biden holds with contempt the business owner, just like Nancy Pelosi holds with contempt the salon owner. They hate them. They want middle America to be destroyed, and so they favor the criminal. They favor talking to the racist. They talk to the Louis Farrakhan following racist who has deemed himself a civil rights leader who claims that this country is racist. So you're racist. Here's some of the things that make you racist, according to Joe Biden and his party. You're racist if you're against predominantly white people in Black Lives Matter going into black neighborhoods, burning them down. So if you say, geez, why are all those white people burning down black neighborhoods? Oh, you're a racist. You have to be for those white people burning down black neighborhoods, or you're a racist. You're a racist if you're against black supremacists, such as Louis Farrakhan's Nation of Islam, that did the security at George Floyd's funeral. If you don't agree with Louis Farrakhan that Jews are termites, you're a racist. This is the world we find ourselves in.
Why do they call them pink-toed Jews?
Let me ask you a question though before you do that, Rob. Am I not mistaken, Carlos? Am I not mistaken? Wisconsin was indeed supposed to be where the DNC was supposed to be this year, was it not? The convention?
Milwaukee, yeah.
Yeah, and 100 different law enforcement agencies walked off the job.
Right.
You want to put that in context as well?
Well, I guess
of Kenosha, you're talking about 100 different law enforcement agencies in Wisconsin said we're not coming.
Right. So you remember that old Eddie Murphy bit, when he was making believe that he was going to be, what it would look like for the first black president in the United States, and his acceptance speech, running back and forth in the stage because he didn't want to get shot. Okay. That's what basically Joe Biden looks like, with no police protection going to Wisconsin. He was running from neighborhood to neighborhood, I'm sure, because why would any police work a detachment in protecting Joe Biden in Wisconsin after what he did and said? Correct?
Guys, I got to tell you, in his Pittsburgh appearance, and I'm not giving away sources and methods or any kind of operational details, but if you watch that video and they talk about principal protection all the time, I got to tell you, I wasn't impressed with what I saw. I mean, he was exposed.
Yeah, no, they have big problems. They manicured the press conference yesterday to a point where it was just an absolute joke. I mean, an absolute joke. I don't think that Joe could do a press conference without just gunslinging it. Just standing there and taking questions without his aides or anything else.
And to go back to your point on Nancy Pelosi, this is why she's come out already to say there shouldn't be debates.
Right. No, she knows. She understands. So the question goes to you, Robert. Is he going to be the nominee in November?
I don't think so. It doesn't matter.
You don't.
I mean, I know we've been saying that for a long time. I think that my guess is he'll get stricken with COVID. That'll be my guess, is the excuse that they'll use. But regardless, it doesn't matter if he is or isn't. It's everybody that's voting for Joe Biden knows they're not voting for Joe Biden for president. Everybody knows it. They'll lie to you. They'll say, "Oh no, Joe Biden's." They know right now. They know even if Biden is elected president within a year or two, it'll be Kamala Harris or whoever they deem will be that. Everybody knows that. And that's one of the problems I have with so many people is just the blatant dishonesty. That just tell the truth. Like, I would have more respect for if you said, look, I hate Trump so much, I'm voting for Joe Biden, and I fully understand that Joe Biden doesn't have the physical capacity to be president. But that's okay. They'll bring someone in that'll do a good job. That's at least an argument. I might disagree with it, but at least that's being honest. We know that that's the case. Everybody knows it. Everyone. Just like everybody knows that mail-in voting has never been done to the scale that the Democrats want, and we could already see fraud even at the absentee level. Everybody knows that the voter registration rolls are a mess in the entire country. Everybody knows that people are going to be receiving ballots that have no business receiving them, or multiple ballots. I get mail all the time from the people that lived here before me. I'll be getting their ballots. We know that this stuff, we saw in Paterson, New Jersey, that the election had to be redone because mail-in voting was such a disaster. We all know this. We all know that it's Biden supporters and Democrats that are engaged in these riots. Everybody knows it. Everybody knows that it is, and this is something I want to talk to Todd about, being a journalist. Everybody knows that remotely follows journalism, that it is not journalistic standards to cite unnamed sources that are claiming they heard someone say something and then go back to those unnamed sources and say, well, they've confirmed the story. That's not journalism. No, you know that, Todd, and everybody at the Atlantic and at the New York Times and CNN and MSNBC, they know that, but they don't care anymore. We have to pretend all of these things aren't truths. We have to pretend that the obvious lies aren't lies. And I'm sick and tired of it. We have to pretend that the same people that were my left-wing friends in 2003 when we were against the Iraq war, we have to pretend now the Democrats that are freaking out because Trump wants to bring soldiers home, we have to pretend that proves that Trump's a xenophobe. That the Democrats are the party of peace and an extension of being the... Think, just two little examples here real quick. If you're for peace, if you're a peaceful person, then you want more troops in wars. That's the Democrat argument. If you're against racism, then you have to support white people going into black neighborhoods, burning them down. These are the Democratic positions. Now, we all know that these are lies, but they control the narrative. They control culture. So we just have to accept, oh, okay, yeah, I guess that's fair.
Speaking of making believe and being fake, the talk of a vaccine for COVID is absolute crazy talk, no?
Well, yeah, and the head of UPMC just came out. One of the doctors that's been at the forefront of COVID-19 had a press conference Thursday or Friday, and he said, hey, I got news for you. Even with a vaccine, the pandemic ain't over.
No.
It's not going to stop
obviously.
anything.
Listen, I'm not a scientist, but the world record of coming up with a vaccine is like 5 years, not including the 3 years that it takes to go through the process in the FDA.
Which is what he said. Go ahead.
Let's just say, for argument's sake, that you could knock off the lion's share and fast track the FDA approval. How do you fast track the 5 years of science required to come up with a vaccine?
What if I were to tell you, and I had this conversation with somebody earlier today, what if I were to tell you this is going to be, and trust me, they're going to sit there and say I'm an anti-sciencer and an anti-truther. What if I were to tell you that we don't necessarily need a COVID vaccine by November 1st? That within the 5 months of this coronavirus hitting, the therapeutics have developed and the treatment has changed so drastically to treat the different strains. I said it, there's different strains of COVID-19. That they're treating it with therapeutics so effectively, the recovery rate is now almost 100%.
Does that include people over 70?
So they've done, the CDC came out and said 6% of the deaths, 6% of the deaths had zero comorbidity, zero. 94 had at least one, 94%.
Right.
And most of those numbers are 75 or older.
Right. So
which were already sick, infirmed in the nursing home, right?
Right. So we
shut down the country over 6%?
Well, we shut down the country because of ignoble incentives.
We shut it down. We shut it down because the Democrats...
Ignoble financial incentives given to these nursing homes and given to these hospitals that pay them tens of thousands of dollars for COVID deaths and COVID cases. The incentives are ignoble. And that's the problem in general with respect to the context of how the Democrats operate in this country regarding the poor. You cannot solve the problems that the poor have by giving them money. You cannot solve that problem by giving them money. These are horrible incentives. It takes a lot more work and a lot more discernment and a lot more context to help these people, because these problems are varied in a lot of different ways. You know, the door that was left open for Bernie Sanders to get acclaim in the last 30 years was on one single fact: the fact that conservatives never did anything about medical bankruptcies. As a young conservative, it bothered me. To no fault of their own, your life is ruined? That's not the America that I know. And then that same America didn't do anything about it and let a bozo like Bernie Sanders run with it for 30 years. And make no mistake, the fact that we did not deal with the problem of medical bankruptcy has turned into the Marxist movement we have today. That was the seed.
Not entirely. That's definitely a big weapon that they've used.
It's 93% of it.
I think it doesn't. But here's the thing. I know we had this discussion kind of last week.
I'm sorry. I couldn't help myself.
We had this discussion last week. This movement was inevitable. It was. It doesn't matter. You could say, well, the issue is this: police violence. This is karma that we have it coming because of police violence. Republicans didn't do anything about healthcare, so this was the inevitable response.
Well, no, not police violence. The karma is not due to the police violence. The karma is due to the fact that the people in charge of adjudicating these police incidents whitewashed it by letting them go.
It's irrelevant. It's irrelevant.
But the adjudication is, we either have justice or we don't.
It's irrelevant. It's irrelevant. A man just killed himself in Minneapolis. They rioted. It had nothing to do with, the police didn't properly adjudicate his death. This movement was coming. Why was it coming? Because Marxists have sought to overthrow this country since the Cold War, and they were infiltrating our academia ever since the 40s. And when the Gulag Archipelago came out that showed how disastrous Marxism was in the Soviet Union, the postmodernists that influenced and took over Western academia said, we need to break people up based on more groups than just financial groups. We need to break them up based on their skin color, based on their gender, based on sexual preference. It doesn't matter what the issue was. Marxism was coming. The real reason is because conservatives lost the culture war. That's why. Now, certainly, you're absolutely right that conservatives did a terrible job looking at the corporate scumbags in the insurance industry and elsewhere that let these medical prices go through the roof and made poor people no longer be able. And look, to Trump's credit, remember in 2018, Trump was like, hey, let's talk about healthcare stuff. And Mitch McConnell said, shh, this doesn't help us win an election. I don't care what helps us win elections. I care about what's best for the country. And the fact that Mitch McConnell was wrong, he said, don't talk about healthcare because it'll help us. It won't help us in the election and we'll lose. How'd that work out for the Republicans? They lost in 2018. That's how it worked out. But I just wanted to say real quick before I forget, talking about the vaccine. Let me be quite clear. There's a solid chance just having this discussion we have now is going to get us kicked off YouTube on this video. So let me just ask YouTube a question real quick. Kamala Harris just came out and said she's not sure she trusts Trump about this vaccine if it's going to be ready so soon. Now, if the CDC comes out and says this is a viable vaccine and we have Kamala Harris going against their word, is she allowed on Facebook? Is she allowed on YouTube? Why is it okay for Kamala Harris, the vice presidential candidate, to ask the same sort of questions we're asking? Why is it okay for her, but we get censored for asking these same questions?
Would she take the vaccine if they won?
Probably not. But go
I'm
ahead,
not taking
Todd.
the vaccine. No, there's no way. The first round of the vaccine?
I'm not taking it.
There is no way.
Right. I mean, I'm not taking it either.
That's pretty cynical stuff there, Todd, don't you think?
Rob, go ahead, and then I'll reclaim my time, but go ahead.
I'm not taking that vaccine. There's no way. There is no way.
No. I meant Kamala Harris. Is she taking the vaccine if she wins the presidency?
There's no way.
She's not going to take it if she loses.
Right.
She's not going to take that vaccine. I guarantee it. And the reason is, I'm not saying that look, all I'm saying is this. I don't trust let me be as, and this will get us kicked off. I don't care. Let me be as easy as possible, as clear as possible on this. I could talk to the drunk down the street that sits at the bar every day. You know, we used to have things called bars before COVID. People would go and have a couple alcoholic beverages. It was a good time.
I loved them.
You would have
awesome.
you would have loved it, Todd. It was it was in the past. It's something that we used to do.
Some of them were called dive bars.
Yeah.
Dive, yeah. Well, you dove into
dive
them.
bars.
That's where that was my scene. I could talk, you could point out the biggest drunk there and be like, all right, Rob, go talk to that person. And I could go up to that person and say, hey, let me ask you a question. There's going to be this bad virus that comes. Who do you think that it'll affect the most? And I'll guarantee you that that drunk would eventually have slurred out the words, probably old people, right? He would have known that.
Right.
Somehow that drunk and every single person with higher than a second grade education in this country understood that the most vulnerable people to any sort of illness are going to be elderly people that are already struggling with their immune system. We all knew that. Every lay person. We're not epidemiologists. We're not biologists. We all knew that. Can someone explain to me how Health Secretary Levine didn't know that? Or Cuomo's government didn't know that? Or Whitmer's government didn't know that? Well, that's exactly right. It is, I refuse to believe that they accidentally came up with the plan to send infected COVID patients into nursing homes. This was
about granularity now, okay?
It was an intentional act.
Listen, man, this virus is a silent virus. It's a novel coronavirus. And it's so novel that they're testing this vaccine on the lab rats. Yeah, the rats are going, don't poke me, man. Don't do it. I don't want it. Don't poke me.
So the reason I brought that up, just real quick to finish the thought, is why would I trust the people that said to me, and they said it to you, Todd, and they said it to you, Carlos, because I was talking to you when COVID started. They said, if you question our decisions, you want grandma to die. Remember, that was the line of the attack. Oh, you don't care about old people? You want grandma to die? That's what they told us while they were sending COVID patients into nursing homes, forcing grandma to die.
Unless, of course, grandma was woke.
Right, okay, right. Unless it was Secretary Levine's.
If it was related and then got removed from the nursing home.
That's right. So for all of you listening that aren't from Pennsylvania, while our Health Secretary Levine was assuring us that nursing homes would be taken care of, and then in private was telling nursing homes to take COVID patients, which led to tens of thousands of deaths, while she was doing that, she privately removed her mother from a nursing home. That's what she did. And so,
mother, to be fair, because her mother said she wanted to leave.
Right. So let me just to finish up here. Why would I trust the same people that intentionally killed nursing home patients to then come up with the vaccine and say, oh, our bad. Sorry we intentionally killed your grandparents. But hey, take this shot that's rushed forward faster than any vaccine in history. Go ahead, take it. Now, the same group of people that...
The answer is no.
Right, and just real...
Carlo?
Go ahead, Todd.
Go ahead, Rob. Finish up. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, and real quick, again, this is the same group of people. We're talking about, well, wait a minute. If a vaccine would come, don't you need so many trials, clinical trials, things like that to make sure it's safe? The same group of people that are telling us, well, we're going to have to take this vaccine are the ones that immediately said hydrochloroquine, that can't work. It's dangerous to even suggest it. Now, how do those two things jive together? Like, on one hand, you want us to take something that's unprecedented in history, a vaccine coming up in a span of only 6 months, unprecedented, without proper testing. You want us to take that. But when it came to people having... I'm no doctor. I'm not telling you to take hydrochloroquine. I don't know. All I know is this. It was something that many medical experts said could be promising, and yet the entire left and all of the academic experts like Fauci were like, no. We can't even look at that drug. But the vaccine, you got to take the vaccine. I'm not buying it. They're not going to inject me. It's not happening.
So let's move on.
Well, Carlos, give me 2 seconds. I want to hit what Rob just said along the number side. Earlier this week in Harrisburg at Pima, I asked Secretary Levine about the PCR testing off the New York Times article that ran, I believe, a week ago today.
Yep.
Tell us what
about
PCR
the 90% being off, right?
Tell us what PCR is.
It's the test. It's the test you take for COVID. Okay? It tests the nuclear material, the DNA of the virus, if you've had it. So what I asked was the same thing the New York Times posited and said, well, if you're getting a test positive, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're highly virulent or you're contagious. It just shows that you either have had it or you currently have it. But you could have so little of the virus because that PCR test is tuned so tight that you're going to show positive. right? And if you took that same test 4 hours later or 12 hours later, you may show up negative. But because it is so finely tuned to find any strand of COVID, right? So I asked Threshold again. She couldn't answer me. 3 different times I asked the same question about PCR testing. And all I got was, it's a specific test, it's highly accurate, but you can't tell me a threshold. And you want us to believe you on a vaccine that we're supposed to take with heaven only knows what those side effects are in the first batch, second batch, third batch? In the fastest vaccine in the history of time. Yeah, no, I'm not taking the needle.
Right. Tell us what happened.
By the way, they may be mandating school kids and teachers and staff to have the vaccine before you go back to school.
Yeah.
Listen, and I just want to say,
Saturday.
and while we're on this, real quick, because I think it's important, according to the CDC numbers, right? We're talking about schools. According to the CDC numbers, as of yesterday, do you know how many people under the age of 24 have died of COVID in the United States?
Less than 60?
No, because between the ages of 15 and 24, there's 300.
Oh, I'm sorry.
14 and under, it's less than 60.
Okay.
So what you're talking about basically...
You said 24. I'm sorry.
Yeah, 24 and under. That's how they have it listed. 350 people.
How many of them had diabetes type 1?
Well, it's not listed, but let me tell you what it does list. You know how many people 24 and under have died of other causes? Let's see. Close to 40,000. So we're talking about 300 people. And that's 24.
Why shouldn't we mock these people?
It's a joke. And again, if you go further up on the numbers, it's like if you're looking at from the age of 55 and under, we have about 14,000 that have died. The CDC, the director of the CDC came out and said more people 18 and under have died as a result of the lockdowns than of COVID. We need to get back to school immediately. And yet still the Democrats say don't go back to school. It's
and in Pennsylvania, COVID deaths that aren't certified by coroners.
Right. So I know you wanted to talk about the 40 million, Rob, real quick.
Yeah, that is something I want to talk about. So from the get-go, I warned, and I think I was one of the best people in the country on this, if I could brag about myself. I said that the way you treat and budding emergency is through a system of triage. And what triage means, it's this kind of a concept when it comes to like hospitalization and medical field. It means you deal with the biggest threat first. So if you're a field medic in a war and someone, got shot in the foot, that's painful. But if someone got shot in the heart and they're literally going to die, you treat the person who's at risk to die first, the biggest emergency first. And so I said, there are 3 things that are affecting our country right now. There's COVID, the actual disease. We'll survive it. Then there's the economic fallout, which will be vastly more harmful to this country than COVID. But the biggest thing was, even more than the economic fallout, was if we accept that when the government says they could take our rights anytime they want based on some unknown threat, it will fundamentally be the end of this country. And that's exactly what we're seeing as they say, they slap us in the face by saying you could go out and riot, but you can't go to work. That's the sort of mentality that'll lead to the end of the country. But anyways, in this theme, CNN put out a piece, not an article, but actual video production, where they claim that it's backed up by numbers from the government that this month, 40 million people are facing eviction because the economic situation is so dire for them. Now, CNN and the Democrats are spinning this to say, this proves that we need another bailout. This proves that we need another stimulus. But here's the problem. One, the Republicans offered a stimulus. The Democrats just offered a different one. They're both garbage. Don't get me wrong. They're both garbage. The point is this, though. You can't just keep having stimulus. What the Democrats did and the people proposing the lockdowns, they ignored and said people like me were terrible. And they said we had to have the lockdowns. And now, predictably, when we could see the lockdowns are devastating to this country, they crushed the economy, and now they say, now you have to trust us to fix the economy. It is a joke. We are just at the forefront of what these lockdowns did. We're just now learning. I've read research that suggests that by using calculus and other methods, they've been able to determine that of the 180,000 deaths, there's probably only close to 50,000 unique deaths from COVID. In other words, many of the people that died, if we accept their numbers, are people that were so elderly, they probably would have died in the next 3 months from other conditions. So it's tragic that they lost their life. Don't get me wrong. Any death is tragic. But if you, instead of looking at the amount of people that died and instead look at the man hours lost, so 20-year-olds that are dying from the lockdowns, so they were expected to live another 60 years. That actually, we've already seen right now that the lockdowns have killed more human hours than COVID. And we're just at the beginning. The effects of this lockdown economically are going to persist for probably a decade. So the medical causes of the people that actually died because they weren't getting treatment for other illnesses or through substance abuses or because of suicide or because of malnutrition, all of those types of things through the lockdown, those numbers we're already seeing are terrible. The CDC, the head of the CDC is already admitting more young people are dying because of the lockdown than from COVID. And we're just at the tip of the iceberg. We're going to see this economic fallout occur for the next 10 years. All right, 40 million people facing eviction now. And people on CNN that watch it and people on the left smugly look at me and go, see, that somehow proves our point. Why? People like me, Todd, and Carlos were the ones that told you from the get-go. Do you have any clue the disaster that's about to come down as you shut down our economy? Do you have any idea how many lives will be ruined? Literally lost in many cases, but even a far greater people whose lives will be ruined, whose business they worked their whole life for will be closed and never open up again, who will lose their houses, who will not be able to financially provide for their families. And your solution is print more money? Spend another $3 trillion? Money is just a paper symbol of the wealth of this country. I have people that work in the trucking industry that are telling me that they can't even ship things anymore because many of the gizmos that they ship to go to specific factories aren't being created because those factories are out of business, which means the factories down the line can't get the parts they need to be in business, and so on and so forth. We tried to can the other day. We couldn't even find lids for canning. In the most wealthy country in the history of the world, you can't find basic products. You can't find guns and ammo, but there's another reason for that, right? Because people are buying them because the Democrats are coming after your right to defend yourself. But this is going to be an unmitigated disaster. And let me just say real quick to finish this up. As always, the people that caused the disaster, for example, the Marxists that we now see that are saying Marxism, embrace Marxism. Every single time it fails, every single time that Marxism's been tried, it fails. And yet they never have the self-awareness to say, oh, we were wrong. They just say, no, it wasn't our fault. And just like that, we see all of these people that were for the lockdown. Now they're saying we have to trust them when it comes to economic matters. You're the people that destroyed the economy, and the American people for the next 10 years as you struggle to pay your bills. Remember who was right saying we should not accept a lockdown unless it's proven that it's the only way going forward. I've yet to see any evidence that the lockdown saved lives. None. But I see evidence that 40 million people are now facing eviction because of it.
Yeah, I don't believe the numbers. I think that the numbers are overblown, and I don't see any evidence that 40 million people are going to be evicted.
Whether
I'm
they'll
not saying that your hypothesis of the condition of the economic condition that we have in this country isn't correct. Okay, I believe you, but I think that that's just a number that's being used to kick this political ball down the field. Speaking of which,
Todd.
May I for a moment, Carlos?
Yeah, but I want to move on because it's 4:30, and
I just have a quick point on this in the state. I just have a quick point on the state. Governor Wu came out this week and said, or last week, he couldn't extend the moratorium on evictions, right, for landlords and all that kind of deal. My question is this:
do you understand why?
Oh, and here's what I'm going to say. Why not? 1, 2, I know why. Then he put it on the legislature and the federal government.
Tell us why, because there's a lot of people that don't understand why he can't extend it.
Politically, he wants to dump this on the state legislature and the federal government because it's their fault. He's done everything else by his own pen, by executive fiat and order. There's no reason he can't extend that moratorium by his pen or his fiat if he chose to. He's done everything else that way. So now all of a sudden we can't extend it because there's some law out there? Okay.
What is the law that he's claiming?
He's saying he can't do it. And I'd have to go back and look at the granular detail, but he's saying he can't extend it, which I got to tell you, I'm calling BS on because I think he could extend it. He's extended the emergency declaration time after time after time. What's the difference?
So what you're saying is that he's doing it to be able to hurt Trump.
No question.
Okay.
So he was, and here's why I know what he's doing is a bunch of nonsense. Because Dennis, I believe, of ABC 27 in the Harrisburg market asked him, I think it was yesterday or 2 days ago, in a press conference, when's the last time you had a conversation with the Speaker of the House or the Leader of the Senate in the Pennsylvania Senate? I don't remember.
Yeah.
How are you putting it on them then?
Well, here's the problem. The Gordian knot in this thing is that the problem with talking about the pandemic and the response that government has had to it is that, at least in Pennsylvania, there's nothing we can do about it. There's nothing we can do about it. Our elected officials are not strong enough to come up with creative ways to be able to make this issue equal and fair and just and balanced. That's the most important part. There is no balance in government regarding this. The governor has all the leverage and all the political power, and the legislature has proven that they have none.
So the only way this changes is 20 seats in the House have to flip.
No, all of them have to go, including the Democrats. Why would we want to reelect any Republicans in the state of Pennsylvania when this was their performance in terms of navigating government through COVID? You must go. We're either going to have values or we're not, gentlemen.
And ladies.
All right,
moving on.
What do you want to move on to?
So what did the president say against the veterans this week, Todd?
He loves our veterans. He loves our military. He loves our honored dead. But
So
don't
much that
ask
he
anonymous sources who were in meetings that claimed that they were in that never happened, when the people that were actually in the meetings claim that wasn't what was said.
Right, and what was said is that he called veterans that were in cemeteries in France losers, and he didn't want to go and visit them.
I mean, it's ridiculous on its face. It's ridiculous on its face. The guy that rebuilt the military and honors the vets and cleaned up the VA hates veterans? That's a new one.
Mm-hmm. So, did you see what happened in California this week with SB 145 that says that adults having sex with a 14-year-old isn't illegal anymore in California? That must have gotten a couple of "where you at" attaboys by some people here in Williamsport, no?
Oh, no question. I was kind of surprised with all the moving vehicles that were moving vans and moving trucks in New York City. If a couple of them didn't stop here on the way and say, well, I guess I'm moving. No better time than the present with SB 145.
Yeah. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your thoughts about that law?
I think it's abhorrent on its face that this is going to be, now we're going to look the other way on that one.
Mm-hmm.
In the same week that the Marshal Service and the FBI and Homeland Security are announcing that they're finding missing and exploited children by the dozens in different states in this country.
Right, in Ohio
I
and
think
Georgia.
SB 145 should be stricken from the record yesterday.
Who's Wendy Bell? Todd?
Well, she used to be at KDKA Radio. She was, I believe, at WTA TV before making some pretty sensitive comments that got her fired on TV. And then she apparently has been removed from KDKA Radio earlier this week after a 2-month battle with Twitter and social media. Entercom Media took her off the air.
late this past week and said, we don't condone any violence, this and that and the other, because she made some statements going into the Mount Rushmore Trump appearance about what snipers should do and protesters and this type of deal. And it was deemed that it was pretty insensitive. So instead of asking for an on-air apology and saying, look, we're not condoning violence, and she's been threatened as well at her home. Okay. They took her off the air and they purged her from the KDK radio website. And for all intents and purposes, she may be done.
And well, she may be done with them, but she has a pretty sizable following, correct? I mean, they did her.
Yeah,
they basically did her a favor, because if she goes private, she's still going to have the same viewership and tons of people that are willing to advertise.
Oh no! And let's just say this. Having been the victim of a car bombing in my driveway, I am Wendy Bell.
Yeah.
Okay, so I stand firmly with Wendy Bell for her ability to have First Amendment rights of free speech and freedom of the press.
Mm-hmm.
And I've reached out. I'm waiting to hear back. And again, she's kind of going radio silent right now because I'm sure there's legal ramifications to what's going on,
Mm-hmm.
and there's contracts involved. So I would really enjoy having a conversation with her in the very near future about some things we have in the works.
Yeah, no,
because she is a patriot.
Right. And we'll get to that. That the Molotov tendency of people to try to coerce others. But before we get to that, if Biden is up on the polls, Rob, as much as they say he is, why is he still attacking the president and not talking about his own policies?
Because he's not up in the polls. That's why. There's no explanation. I contend, and this is just the conspiracy theorist in me, but that the polls are gaslighting, because inevitably, they told us this week. The Washington Post told us that they've planned this out. That that their prediction is, it wasn't the Washington Post. Another place predicted this. It's a firm that's working with the Democrats, one of their biggest firms. It predicts that on election night, it will appear as if Trump won it in a landslide. But just trust them. After a month or so, when they count the remaining ballots from the mail-in, that it'll actually be that Biden wins. We have Hillary Clinton said, under no circumstances should Joe Biden concede. Right? So their plan is to gaslight us. So they'll say, well, if all the polls say Biden's winning, and the election, Trump wins in a landslide, then clearly that something illegitimate happened. So we need the more ballots. That must be it. There must be a legitimate reason for Joe Biden to win. But they know. They know the reason. Why all of a sudden on a dime did we go from riots? What riots? It's all peaceful to, of course there are riots. It's Donald Trump's fault. Why did we flip on a dime like that? Why did this story in The Atlantic come out with 4 unnamed sources? Even though we have Freedom of Information Act requests, we have named sources that were on the ground, as Todd was suggesting, that debunk this story. Why did it come out the very time that Joe Biden looked so bad in Kenosha, the very time that Nancy Pelosi is being called out for being a hypocrite? Why would that story come then? And Joe Biden doesn't have anything to stand on himself. Our media is a disgrace. Here, Todd, if you ever get a chance to ask Joe Biden's campaign questions, here's 2 for you. 1, you say you're against the riots and things like that. Mr. Biden, or former Vice President Biden, I guess to be polite, can you explain why your staffers and your vice presidential pick both advocated to donate money to bail out these rioters? There's a question our media won't ask. Or number 2, Vice presidential candidate, former Senator Harris, can you explain to us why you think that Joe Biden, the man that you're running under, is a serial sexual assaulter? Yet you're still running as his VP candidate? And so to answer your question, Carlos, they know that they're not winning. And so they know that they don't have, we talk about this all the time, right, Carlos? The reason that they need to censor us so much, the reason that they need to have total control over the flow of information is because their ideas are so bad. So they can't stand on defending what their ideas for the country. Their ideas for the country are just to burn it down. They are going to punish you.
Trump is bad.
That's right. They're going to punish you for not voting for them. That's their suggestion.
So my question to you is, and this is a hard calculus. When Joe Biden comes out and says that a black man invented the light bulb, not a white guy named Edison, that's specifically geared to signal to the Bernie supporters that he's hoping to have vote for him, that he's winking at them. But between you and me, are they really going to support him? Do you really believe the Bernie supporters are going to automatically vote for Biden. I don't see it. And there's so much, jumping through hoops and turning yourself into a pretzel to try to signal these people like AOC and the rest of that progressive wing by saying, like, I've never in my entire life heard that anybody but Edison was the person that invented the light bulb. And then when I did do the homework on it, there was a man who happened to be black who developed a liniment that was better than Edison, but that person said that the patents that Edison put forward were legitimate, and he stood with Edison at that time. So I don't see the progressive wing voting for Biden.
They will.
I just see the progressive wing doing what they're doing, thinking that they're going to be able to convince other Democrats to vote for him. But that's not who's going to decide the election, is it?
Well,
The people who are going to decide the election are the people who've never voted before, ever.
Looks like
And
black.
they know who they're going to vote for this year, right?
It looks like
And that's
black
it.
Americans are
So
going
our
to decide.
YouTube and Twitter followers don't crush us. Carlos meant to say he developed one of the filaments. Liniment is what Joe Biden's going to put on before the debates.
Right.
And
Right.
maybe after.
Right.
Right.
So let me push back a little here, Carlos. I think they will vote for Joe Biden, and here's why. Their enthusiasm won't be as high. There won't be as many turnout as would have for like Bernie. But here's why. Donald Trump just did possibly the most impactful thing that he's done as president, and it went almost without mention. He has banned in federal agencies the pushing of critical race theory. This is something that I have talked about since 2004, since my time in debate, this cancerous Marxist ideology, which says that we judge white people as people that have historical sin and they need to be responsible for the sins of their forefathers, and everything needs to be viewed through the lens of race. It is cancerous. It is racist. It is terrible. It is driving this country apart, and it's infiltrating every single area of society. We just had reports on Tucker Carlson the other night. Someone who's been studying this showed that the FBI does critical race training. We have people that work on our nuclear weapons systems that are using critical race theory, etc. And our tax dollars are paying millions of dollars to train our government agencies on how to engage in this Black Lives Matter sort of rhetoric. So Trump did this, and it's very impactful. So the way this applies to your question is this. If you're a Bernie supporter, you have to understand the reason you're a Bernie supporter and that he's gotten as much attention as he had is because that our academia has been inundated with this ideology for the past 30 years. Donald Trump is the biggest threat to that ideology at this point. And so their gamble is this. They know, just like we know, just like Biden supporters know, that Biden is an empty suit. He, unfortunately, is a man who's going through some severe illnesses, it looks, and he doesn't have all of his faculties. So their gamble is the gamble that Bernie Sanders himself has said, which is we get Joe Biden in office and then we apply as much pressure as humanly possible on him to make him the most progressive candidate ever. So their wager is we know that we can't pressure Donald Trump to do the things we like, but Joe Biden is nothing. He's an empty slate. Also, an election of Joe Biden is just a battle for the ideology of the soul of the Democratic Party. And the progressives are saying our best chance for this Marxist takeover that we want is someone like Joe Biden, who's an empty vessel, and then we fill in that vessel by forcing him through violence and intimidation to do the things we want. So that's why I think they will be voting for him.
That's a really long explanation to try to get someone to vote for Joe Biden. It's not simple. It's too complicated in my mind.
Well,
So
you want the simple explanation? Orange man bad.
yeah, no, that's just not enough, I don't think. Christopher Rufo is the guy that you're talking about, and I put up his tweet right here. So 449. Let's move on to Myrtle Beach. Todd, what's the latest?
So last weekend, part 20 came out, I believe, on the eve of the show. And we talked about that, where the City of Williamsport Police Department claims that no records exist with regard to the Myrtle Beach case. And then it was followed up with Part 21 that basically called out the leadership at Little League was staying loyal to the Williamsport baseball program because of the affiliation they had with the CEO and his son having played in that program in years gone by, while also contradicting their own shield with the idea of, courage and character and everything else. And I just laid out the case of why, Little League has a lot of ties to the Myrtle Beach story and all the different family members that were on the trip as either a coach or a family member, parent of a kid on that team, and put out Part 21.
Okay.
That's the snapshot. I've got more if you guys have questions.
Yeah, you cut out there did you cut out there a little bit?
I heard him.
Possibly
Okay.
coming back from the share screen.
Okay. So what can we expect going forward?
Part 22 will be about a party
Well,
that happened.
before you get to that, any updates from the state police?
State police are continuing the investigation. I had a conversation earlier this week with the investigators, and there are multiple investigators with aspects of this case. They're still looking into the matter. And guys, you have to understand, this is a marathon. It's not a sprint. And I'm totally okay with the way the investigation is progressing because there's a lot of moving parts in this, and there's a lot of people involved in this. So I'm completely okay with the level of communication that's going on, the professionalism that's being displayed by the state police here in Pennsylvania in this investigation, and agencies they're collaborating with. So I have a sneaking suspicion that in the future we're going to be seeing some movement.
Okay.
At least on the arson, which it was deemed an arson. And hooray, Bob and Laura reported what the state police said. It's been deemed an arson.
So, what are the future stories that you're looking into publishing with respect to this
So
case?
Jennifer Lake Wokebagon Part 5. I've been in receipt of some documents for a while now from her nonprofit organization. So Part 5 will be forthcoming. Received some information from the city of Williamsport and a right to know answer in regard to Mayor Slaughter. So there's a new series that may start called Getting Slaughtered. The least transparent mayor in the history of the city of Williamsport will potentially be a new series that's being published. And then Part 22.
And what's your core concern regarding his handling of any events that will prompt this type of story from you?
He ran on a platform of transparency.
Okay.
So when someone submits a right to know request, the least you can do is get the address right when you send them a response. That's the first thing. Second thing is when you ask them for absolute public records, you provide them. You don't hide if you're going to be transparent. So we'll begin at that point and go forward. And then Part 22 of the Myrtle Beach story will be discussing a party that happened in Myrtle Beach that involved multiple players, multiple adults, and we'll explore what happened on that particular evening and where it was in proximity to the team hotel, if it was held in the team hotel, who was involved, and all the different photographic evidence that's been obtained.
Okay.
So it's a busy week.
Fantastic.
And maybe a visit here or there to Harrisburg to talk to the Secretary of Health and the governor again. We'll see. Maybe a trip to DC to talk to some DC folks as well. We'll just see what the next week has in mind after the holiday. It's a short week, guys, with a holiday on Monday.
Right. So, in closing, what are your final thoughts, Robert Knorr?
So I think that it's important to know what's really occurring in this country. understand that this attack that came out in Trump about him hating the troops and saying that they're losers, what they're doing is they understand that they're going after his strength. We can see through the war games that they simulated that their plan is going to be to make the election as murky as possible, to encourage rioting on the street, and then to claim that the military needs to come in and remove Trump from office in their second attempted coup. And so they're going to repeatedly try to drum down his support through the military because of things like that. Let me be quite clear. They have, I think it's General, correct me if I'm wrong, Todd, maybe you heard this story. General McChrystal has came out and he's working with a firm with the DNC that's supposedly going to use military grade technology to counter disinformation that comes out of Trump's team, which is a clever way of saying that DARPA funded assets that are used as weapons of war against other countries are now going to be propagandizing people in the United States against conservatives and Donald Trump. And so you can expect story after story to come out in the next 60 or so days before the election. There will be scandal after scandal. There is no journalistic integrity. Every journalist knows that these sorts of smears from undocumented sources or people that won't come forward should not be reported as if they're true. Yet they're not journalists. They're just propagandists. We had a Trump supporter that was executed last week by someone who now the video shows that this person actually hid in waiting. And as the audio seemed to suggest, this person murdered Jay Donaldson for being a Trump supporter. That's why he was murdered. And yet the media is still gaslighting that it's Trump supporters that are the problem. Joe Biden not only continues to repeat the Trump said Nazis are good people hoax, he literally said about a man who was just executed. He lied. He said this was a man that was shooting rubber bullets and paintballs, and then someone in the crowd reacted and shot him. That's a lie. Imagine that if Donald Trump in Charlottesville had denigrated the woman who was killed. That's what Joe Biden just did.
Or you applied the same values to Rittenhouse.
Right, exactly. And so expect more of this. They want you totally defenseless. They don't want you to have police. They don't want you to have the right to defend yourself. Like they censored me on YouTube the other day. They want you censored totally. They don't want you to speak. They don't want you to defend yourself. They're going to push out more propaganda. They're going to try to steal this election. And lastly, let me say this to YouTube specifically, since we're nearing the end of the show. As far as I'm concerned, YouTube, you are an enemy of this state. You are intentionally trying to swing the election for people that have the interest of the American people not close to their heart, that want to attack and bring down middle America and working class America. I hope that you lose your protections. I personally will do everything I can using your platform and going outside of your platform to take down your monopoly on this power and control of information. I hope that you are sued for all of the crimes you've committed and all the damage that you've incurred, including libelous, slanderous, and any other slander and any other crimes that you've committed. I hope that people see you for the propagandist that you are. I hope that we actually elect Republicans that understand your power and how you're more dangerous than any outside country that could influence our elections. And I hope the American people start to wake up about how dangerous these corporations that are anti-American and want to see the destruction of America really are, and how they know they have to censor people that are making reasonable arguments and good points because they can't counter them. And the only tool the weapon has is silence, censorship, threats of violence, and actual violence, because they have no good ideas and they want to destroy the working and middle class in this country.
Yeah. If this is what you're doing, you are at the bottom of the barrel.
Yeah.
Todd, final thoughts.
Yeah, guys, I want to let everybody know that the feedback that I get on a recurring basis from this show and what we're putting out there in defense of, family, friends, neighbors, countrymen, is not going unnoticed by a lot of people. And we talked about it earlier in the show with the likes of Wendy Bell. When you see one of these voices get silenced for speaking their mind, I mean, think about the dichotomy. Her contract is to garner ratings. So she says controversial things that an audience responds to in great number. And you take her off the air for saying something controversial, that you've encouraged her to talk about controversial topics. I think it's the greatest contradiction in terms in our nation right now. You can only say certain things, right? And when this president says what he says and turns the world upside down, because he pushes back, and does he say some silly things sometimes? No question. We all do. He's human. We're all human. But to remove somebody from a job or to take exception to what somebody says or publishes, it's not America anymore at that point, because you no longer have freedom of speech. You no longer have freedom of the press. We've had conversations on this very show where we've passionately disagreed with one another. Do I hate either one of you? No. Do we disagree fundamentally on certain things? No question. Last time I checked, that's what makes this country great. Because we can have these discussions. If you go anywhere else on the planet, the outcome's going to be a hell of a lot different. If you happen to disagree with certain opinions, a lot different. So my final thought, Robert, I appreciate you. And as I yield back my time to close out the show to Carlos Saldivia, I appreciate you as well.
Thanks.
Well, I think that I would like to close on those comments. And yes, thank you, Robert, and thank you, Todd, for another great show. I think as Americans, we want the systems to work. We want our institutions to work. We want them to be predictable, and we want them to be just. And I think that recognizing the truth, anywhere you see it, objectively, is 90% of conservatism. Executing on that truth is the rest to the 100%. So that's why you can't stand by and allow censorship and these other controls to affect you. Especially, you can't allow fear to be the very first reaction that you have. You have to use your intellect. You have to use your like I talked at the top of the show. You have to be resolved in your values and the things that you believe in, and you can't make mistakes. You can't be goaded into making unforced errors, and you can't be provoked by the things that people say. I've left Facebook. I'm going to leave Twitter. I'm going to leave YouTube and Google, mostly because of that censorship. Mostly because in Portland there was a man that was wearing a Patriot prayer hat and was murdered by a criminal who said he was 100% Antifa. And instead of banning Antifa pages on Facebook, they banned Patriot prayer yesterday. They banned Patriot prayer yesterday after a man was murdered in cold blood, assassinated on the streets of Portland. This is where they are. This is not control. This is just mistakes. These are unforced errors. So you have to decide. You have to decide for yourself what the truth is. And when you decide, you have to decide for yourself what you're going to do about it. But do something about it, you must. You just can't stand by anymore. Those days are gone. The days of you being able to sit back and let somebody else take care of it. No, you can't do that anymore. Sit down and write the things that are important to you. And then when you write these things down and you've read them and you're prepared, call your local representatives. Call your mayor and tell them your concerns locally. Call your county commissioners and tell them your concerns on the county level, and then on the state level, and your federal on the federal level. Let them know. You need to let them know where you stand, because they're always floating trial balloons. So you make it easier for them if you call them and let them know. And they keep tabs. Trust me, they keep tabs. They have people working for them that keep tabs, and they keep a very, very sharp score. Their pencils are very, very sharp. Let them know exactly where you stand. Let them know, and especially if they are representatives of government that are not your party. Let them know, whether you're Democrat or Republican. More information is better, not less. We live in the greatest country on earth. start acting like it, because no one's coming to save us. Until next week, this is Pushback.